Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this coffee chat this morning. We'd like to start by thanking Nutanix for sponsoring this event. My name is Chris Capusta. I'm a senior manager at Insight in our data management practice, and I'm joined today by one of our senior architects, Mike Corbell. Mike, if you want to just take a moment and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Like Chris said, my name is Mike Corbell, and I'm a lead architect focused on data center and cloud technologies. I've been at Insight for going on 13 years now. I started all the way back in support, pretty much supporting all the technologies that we're going to talk about today, moved on to professional services, and for the better part of 10 years now, I've been doing pre-sales architecture and design.
Excellent, perfect. And today, we're going to discuss the modern infrastructure for modern apps. Mike and I are going to discuss kind of what we see in the industry today, how we're helping clients kind of navigate these challenges. You know, we have some questions we'd like to ask along the way, kind of understand where everyone is in their modern apps journey. There is a box for Q&A as well, so if you do have any questions along the way, please feel free to make it interactive, and we're happy to answer those as we go through the discussion today. But I think Mike, as we kind of start off here, it's really important to define what we mean by modern applications. And maybe we want to take a couple minutes and just kind of set the tone and the definition of when we say modern applications, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, so let's start real high level. What are applications there to do? They're there to support the business. So ultimately, a modern application is going to do that better. It's going to do that in a way that it gives the business some sort of competitive edge. And so that might be through differentiating features within it. I mean, all this is going to be business dependent on what makes it kind of modern, but there are some core features that we find among all these modern applications. You know, they're going to be more secure. It might be that they're lower cost. But one of the big ones is just that they're able to rapidly respond to the changing business environment, to the changing market, to customer demands. And so that rapid response means that applications need to be, they're developed in a little bit of a different way, right? So that's where we have this continuous innovation, continuous development. DevOps is kind of a marketing term that's been coined out there, this continuous loop between development and operations. And that's not just marketing, though. I mean, that's real. Business demands are changing. We've seen that quite substantially the past couple of years, right? So that means that applications have to adapt, and the way that they're developed have to adapt, and that means that IT has to service those their internal customers, the developers, differently. Thankfully, new technologies are available to be able to help us with that, and that's what we're here today to talk about, things about public cloud services, hyper-converged infrastructure, and how you can kind of bridge the gap between the two of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for that. And I think you hit on a very key topic there. I mean, we've been developing applications for what seems like forever. So that's not necessarily new. It's all of the new technologies and development models that go with that. And, I think what we'll get into kind of today is some of the challenges and what, IT organizations are being asked to support as these new modern applications come online, and what development's asking for versus what IT can deliver. And I think we all know kind of what that leads to, shadow IT and all of those kind of, I'll say, the dark sides of app development. But, now that we've kind of defined that, it's kind of important to go along with that to talk about the challenges that come with, modern app development. Like anything else in transformation, there's a lot of benefits. And obviously, Mike touched on a lot of those, being more competitive in the marketplace. Being able to deliver value and features faster to your customers through that CI/CD type of pipeline. But it's, what are the challenges that come with that? And it's how we navigate those challenges that'll, in a lot of ways, dictate the success of our journey on this modern application path. So, just taking a closer look at those challenges, I think we kind of laid out here, significant changes need to occur in the organization. And I think what we see, Mike, in the market today when we're talking to clients is everybody's hyper-focused on the technology. Do I need containers? Do I go to cloud? Can I do this on-prem? What tools do I need to buy to start this kind of transformation on this modern apps journey? And we like to almost pump the brakes a little bit and say, hey, it's technology is important. I don't want to downplay that. but there's a lot of changes that need to occur within the organization, cultural changes. In a lot of ways, the way we support these applications is different than the way we've traditionally supported. I'll call them legacy, or maybe mature is a better word. Mature applications inside of the infrastructure. When we see things like containers and those microservices, you hear a lot about the pets versus cattle conversations. In the traditional world, I build an application, I run it on dedicated servers or dedicated virtual machines. I curate it, I care for it. If something goes wrong, I spend time troubleshooting it. More of the pet side of that analogy. And then as I get into kind of these more modern applications, and we talk about things like microservices and containers and APIs and platforms as a service, the concept of troubleshooting almost goes out the window. If something goes wrong, I kill the running instance and I spin up a new one from my known good source repository. So there's a lot of change that has to go into that organization to kind of bring that new support model. And as I kind of touched on with that, there's platform changes. A lot of silos need to be broken down. We're very used to, I think, in a lot of organizations, we have a development team, we have an operations team. Maybe the two meet in a change control meeting or something like that, but really the conversation isn't often free flowing between the two groups. And you mentioned DevOps early in the definition here, and DevOps tried to correct that. I think in some ways we feel it overcorrected it and put too much emphasis on the development side and maybe not enough on the IT operations side. And we'll cover some of that later this morning as well. But it's a lot about those cultural changes in the organization. And then, not to downplay the technology side. Along with all of those organizational and cultural changes, we need new technology to help support this more modern workflow. And I think we see automation. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, a lot of it's what developers are asking for in order to be able to support this from operations, right? We really kind of see this as two different organizations within the business. On one side, you have the operations team. The other side, you have this development team. And historically, what operations has been focused on are things like systems management. How can they efficiently run the environment, whether that's on-prem or now that might be hybrid or public cloud. They'll be focused on things like ITSM processes, just making sure that they adhere to all the governance and control that the business needs to meet. Of course, infrastructure lifecycle. Every 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, we need to make sure that we're refreshing our gear. And security is always paramount. Security, DR, compliance. They've always historically been focused on that, and of course, the business is demanding that in the future, even more so. But in addition to continuing to need to deliver those things, they also have to deliver an API-first delivery model. And you mentioned shadow IT earlier. That's what the reason that kind of came about is just the easy consumption of these other services. So the first thing that operations team needs to be able to present out is an API. So that way the developers can just write to that, consume it, and from their perspective, kind of magic happens behind the scenes, very much just like with, kind of the public cloud platforms that are out there. They can just consume those resources. And, security is still paramount, compliance, governance, and the last one kind of being monitoring. This is another big one that developers are asking for, is just that one of the terms is kind of hard to say, that the ability to deliver observability. It's a little bit of a fun one, but that's what's being demanded of the operations team. And then all the way over on kind of the developer side of the house, they've historically always focused on product lifecycle management. Of course, they're continuing to innovate their application, but in order to do that faster now, they have to do that pipeline, that continuous innovation, that continuous development. So every week, 2 weeks, they're releasing new features, new capabilities, or security fixes. And so they want to be able to quickly spin these applications up, measure how they're performing. That kind of goes back to the operations team, delivering that observability into the stack. How is it running? Is it meeting the security and governance of the business? And the developers kind of want all this stuff just baked right into the infrastructure, right? That's why they went to That's how we got Shadow IT, is that other providers were making these services available to them in a very easy way to kind of consume them. So, yeah, like you said, I mean, this is instigating a lot of changes, a lot of cultural changes, a lot of changes with just breaking down silos.
Well, and it's interesting because you have that developer mindset of I write to an API and then everything below that is magic. In their world, there is no concept of hardware. There is no concept of operating systems or patching or life cycling or anything like that. And the magic, it turns out, is really hard. And that's that's traditionally where IT operations has succeeded over the years, is making that magic almost transparent to the developer. And I think to your point above, with observability, with automation, with all of the asks around that, we're kind of being asked to change what the magic is, but at the end of the day, we still need all of those core components we've been supporting for years, just consuming them in a different fashion. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to go through kind of a client story here on a journey we've taken them on. I won't use any names for this, but they're a retail customer, so they're in the retail space, about 900 locations throughout the U.S. And the kind of the thought process on IT operations throughout their history has been it's a cost center. It's not an asset to the organization. It's a necessary evil that they have to maintain. And so not really a lot of investment on that side. Obviously, development was very important to them. And I think last count we had with them, they have over 1,800 in-house developed applications. So very large development shop. You think about, on the surface, retail doesn't seem like it would be a technology powerhouse, but really behind the scenes, there's a lot of that innovation, and a lot of the competitive edge of your competition comes from what you can do with those in-house applications versus those off-the-shelf applications. And so during our tenure of working with them, there was a big change in management, and they came to us and said, hey, our new executives really believe that technology is going to be the asset to the organization going forward. It's no longer just a cost center. We're going to merge it with development and really gain a competitive edge against our competition. And they literally came to us and said, how do we be DevOps? What tools do we need to go buy to become DevOps? We need automation. We need infrastructure as code. Tell us what we can go out and purchase, and then we'll be good, and we'll be in that model. And we kind of had to, pump the brakes severely and say, whoa, wait a second. If there is no magic SKU you go buy, and all of a sudden you're in a DevOps model. So we really had to work on a lot of that cultural change that we talked about earlier in here with them. But it was interesting to kind of watch the mistakes along the way. They wanted to start to tackle automation and infrastructure as code first, because they really felt that in order to level up some of the resources they had, they needed to take some of those kind of day-to-day tasks off their plate and add more value, less high touch type of tasks for their teams to work on. And so what they found out of the gate was, well, they gave us a list of processes they have today, and they said, just go automate these for us. And we tried to explain, you can't automate maybe the bad practices you have today, because all you're going to do is those bad practices faster and maybe at scale. And so we went with them on this path. We automated what they asked us to automate to begin with, and we quickly found out, and more importantly, they quickly found out, hey, our processes need to adapt to this new world. We can't retrofit all these new technologies into things we've been doing for years and years on the operations side. So we kind of did a 2.0 with them and refreshed everything and started from scratch. And what we found is it was harder for them to adapt to the cultural changes than it was the technologies themselves. Really getting, you have teammates who for years and years have had the mindset that I have to care for this system, and this is my responsibility, and anything that happens to it, it's my job to make it better. And now you bring in, more of an infrastructure as code mindset, and it's, hey, don't worry about it. If something goes awry, we have a known good configuration in our source control. We just let that one go, and we deploy a new one, and we're good to go. So, the first step was automation. as that sort of matured on that side, we started to look more at API-driven infrastructure and how do I lifecycle things better, and how can I provide that cloud-like experience to my developers and ultimately my end users. On-prem. I want to keep the data on-prem. I don't necessarily want to put everything in the cloud. There's a right use case for the right applications in the cloud, but I want to be able to mimic that experience regardless of where my applications sit. And I think we mentioned DevOps earlier. I think we both kind of hinted that we love the DevOps mentality. However, there's a kind of a better way to do it, and I think at Insight it's what we're calling ModOps. So I'm wondering if you could just take a couple minutes and walk us through kind of our ModOps journey here and how we're helping customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you touched on it already. I mean, this isn't a SKU that, some customer can necessarily purchase. We kind of think about these as there's some core competencies that organizations need to be able to deliver to be able to successfully excel in this kind of DevOps world, this modern application world. And those core competencies are what you said we call ModOps, or modern IT operations. And first of which is automation. In order for us to be able to rapidly respond to the developer requests, that can't be something that just goes to an email queue and someone responds to it manually. All that stuff needs to be automated, and all needs to be API driven. So that's the first thing is working on automating the environment. And part of that means programmable networks too. So that could be SD-WAN, could be software-defined networks inside the data center. Like Nutanix Flow is a great example of software-defined networks inside the data center. And that also helps with security, right? I mean, if we have micro-segmentation in the environment, we can secure the infrastructure, see whether or not there's kind of east-west traffic, determine whether or not there's some form of kind of like ongoing attack, or at least an indicator of an ongoing attack. And security, like at the very foundation of that, is even things that you wouldn't necessarily think of, like a backup. That's a little bit of your background, right, Chris? If a bad actor circumvents everything that we've just been talking about, we have to have a good backup to be able to restore back to in the environment. Mentioned this one earlier, but that monitoring, that intelligent monitoring, not just from a infrastructure standpoint, but we need the platforms. We need all the way up into the application too. We need site reliability engineering, so that way, if our monitoring determines there's a bad data center, bad zone, whatever it is, we can respond, we can react to that. And as part of modern IT operations, everything that I've seen working with customers, that Insight as a whole has seen, and our industry partners like Forrester and Gartner, and we're living in a modern or hybrid cloud world, and we don't see that going away in the future. In fact, we think that's only going to continue to ramp up. Most customers are utilizing public cloud services in some way, shape, or form today. And we think in the future that that's going to continue, and more clouds are going to be brought into the fold. So customers might be in multiple public clouds, and we need to be able to ensure that we know how to make the most efficient use of all these different resources. And so, the DevOps architecture, that's kind of what we were talking about a little bit earlier. At the very beginning, this is what developers are asking for from IT. They'll ask for things like source code control, version control. I'm sure that everyone in the audience has heard of tools like GitHub for sure, GitLab, Bitbucket, or just even Git for version control. They want to be able to instantiate these tools extremely quickly and consume them, not necessarily manage them themselves. And once all that kind of, the very beginning of that DevOps process is taken care of, there's a whole plethora of additional tools that they're looking for. They need a planning system, build test system, change management like ServiceNow. And this is all just kind of facilitating that continuous innovation, continuous development pipeline. And these are just the DevOps tools. We haven't even talked about what the IT operations side needs to be able to bring to be able to support all this. And so to be able to support all this is, this is automated. It's API first, so it's going to be code. We call it infrastructure as code or data center as code. And at the very beginning of this, I'm going to touch on it again. We need monitoring through the whole stack, just like we need security through the whole stack. And we're also going to have platforms like containers. So you wouldn't necessarily, or at least a lot of people would think that containers are more going to fall on the developer side. But really, containers are much like a VM to a developer. They don't want to manage their Docker environment or Kubernetes environment or whatever it is. They just want to be able to consume them. And just like the public cloud is able to allow them to consume them, Nutanix has a solution, Carbon, that allows you to just essentially consume containers on-prem as well. And so containers really fall under the operations team to be able to deliver that infrastructure. And in automation, we got tools that operations will be focused on, like Ansible and Terraform, and config management solutions with SaltStack, Chef, Puppet, things of that nature. And all this needs to be wrapped with cost control, resource control, governance, and security. So, and this branches all the way out into kind of public cloud and on the hyperscalers. And there's just a lot of different ways to build this stuff, which is why we're having this conversation today. There's a lot of questions. We got disparate operating systems, between your on-prem and your public cloud. Nutanix can help with that. Nutanix has Acropolis Hypervisor on-prem. If we push that into the public cloud, we can use Nutanix clusters up there, so that way we have a similar management stack, a similar operating system. How do we do DR with on-prem versus public cloud? And certainly, there's massive distinctions there with backups and restores. Again, Nutanix has Xi Leap for DR as a service. That's just pretty much the one-click button DR as a service solution, where you can back up all your data there, and then in the event of an actual DR, you can just fail over your entire environment. Certainly simplifying DR as a service pretty significantly. Maybe you can touch on a few other things, like around security and automation and things of that nature of public cloud and hybrid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit on a lot of good points there. It seemed as most organizations went down this, again, what we're calling the modern application journey, public cloud almost became the default. Public cloud was seen as modern, on-prem was seen as quote unquote legacy. And if I needed that experience, I had to go to public cloud. And I think you touched on a few good reasons why. Not saying public cloud's bad, as I mentioned, there's great reasons to run workloads in each, but when you do it in a non-planned fashion, the marketing around it is you swipe the credit card and you're good to go. And as you brought up, you have to worry about how do you operationalize that? How do you do cost controls and governance? Data protection is a huge one. There's a lot of thought process out there that the cloud providers are responsible for protecting your data. And when you kind of look at the chart of responsibility there of where that falls, they will absolutely protect the security integrity of the underlying systems. Anything in your tenancy is your problem to protect. And that's often ignored. And it's kind of dangerous as you just, jump in without this proper planning. And then, one I think is really important is the disparate security between the two. And there's a thought process out there, much like data protection. Hey, the cloud providers are responsible for securing all of my data, and if I put it in there, it's naturally secure. And I think what we found, or what the industry found very quickly, is that's not the case. And we've heard about breach after breach of unsecured data, obviously on-prem, but also in cloud providers as well. And so, when you look at bringing that more modern experience back on-prem, security has to be paramount to everything you do. I know we've belabored that point a few times here, but it's something we strongly believe in. And you need to look at technologies that really almost enable that seamless security experience. Not that there's an easy button for security, because bad actors get smarter and smarter every day, and we've got to adapt to that. But there are tools that we can implement that ease the process of securing the environment. And I know, as we look at things like on the Nutanix product set, for example, when we talk about modern infrastructure, their security development lifecycle, SecDL, as it's called, it really integrates security into every step of product development, rather than thinking of it as an afterthought. And it's really about how do I ensure that the environment's up to date and secure. How do I know Nutanix implements the RHEL 7 security technical implementation guides, the Nutanix security management automation, where it can actually assess the environment on an ongoing basis and actually do some remediation against what we consider, completely secure. So the more I can bring that on-prem experience into a modern state and kind of, we talked about automation, automate even some of my security compliance and make sure I'm not exposing my code or my data or my worst case, my IP to bad actors. It's a way we can just continue ongoing security of that environment. And then, you mentioned kind of, microsegmentation and network as code, if you will. And I think you touched on Nutanix Flow there, but really being able to, divide the visibility into that virtual network, that application-centric protection from network threats and malware and ransomware, just continuing to ensure that security and compliance at the network layer, and making sure that as I build out and as I continue to scale this environment, I'm doing it securely. Security's top of mind, and I'm not leaving myself open to any exposures.
That's one of the most exciting things that I've seen, that SCMA that you said, that security change management automation. I mean, with my background that I mentioned, working in support and then going into implementation and now doing that kind of pre-sales architecture, through every one of those roles, I've had customers ask me, what's the best practice from manufacturer X to be able to secure my storage? And then moving on past the storage, what's the best practice to the network, like you were just saying? And then my server, and then my operating system on top of that, and then potentially my application. And okay, now that I have these 2, 3, 4, 5 different manufacturers with all their kind of best practice technical reports or guides or whatever, implement that. And now, how do you make sure that you're consistently adhering to it? How do you report on that? The fact that that's built into a product now, honestly, that's one of the most exciting things that I've seen, especially for folks that don't necessarily have a team that can just sit there and just be watching this the entire time. You can't watch as fast as what something can monitor while being automated. So that's really exciting.
Well,
I like it.
Yeah, and I think the current state of the world, where do more with less, I think has been a common mantra for years in IT, but even more so, during the pandemic and everyone's remote and trying to battle the bad actors on the endpoint side as well as the data center side. Any of that burden that your infrastructure can be smart enough to start to alleviate from your operations team really helps kind of. We mentioned how much it helps to secure the environment, but it also helps you kind of fill that do more with less type of mantra and not have to have people watching everything under the sun. And you mentioned the kind of, having disparate technologies build up my environment versus something that kind of controls that whole stack and can watch that whole stack for you. I agree with you. The value there is insurmountable. And, it almost delivers that it's kind of moving towards that vision of delivering that cloud-like experience on-prem.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, all the way from that initial deployment, which is automated through very heavily through with Nutanix, a process called Foundation. You don't have to worry about your, what BIOS, what firmware, what drivers, all the way to the operating system. All that is just automated and deployed per best practices, per all the, you're getting the SecDL, like you mentioned, STIGs within the CVM. So on the Red Hat side, you're getting SCMA through that whole stack. And all that's just done through Foundation. You don't really have to think about it. So that's great.
Yeah. And it's, then, I think as you're touching on here, it's, one of the challenges we've often had and that competition with public cloud is how do we scale quickly? We touched on automation being a key part of this. And, as you mentioned here, there's great capabilities within that Nutanix platform to expand rapidly. But how about also, understanding when I need to expand? What do we do in that scenario?
Prism Pro with its runway functionality, so that allows you to, you're always capturing your historical trends. So how are you growing in terms of not only just capacity, but what about memory and compute? And so Nutanix Prism Runway has the ability to model out what is it going to look like, if I continue at my current rate for 6 months, 12 months, what resource am I going to run out of? And then with how how many different ways you can expand nimble or the infrastructure and how nimble it can be is you could add in just compute, you could add in storage, you could add in memory heavy nodes to be able to respond to that. And another really interesting thing about Runway is you can, if a new application is coming on board and you know that you're going to have X amount of resources for databases or unstructured data, you can add that to your existing resources and then also kind of see when you're going to run out of capacity. So you really kind of have limitless possibilities in terms of modeling your environment to be able to see how it's going to grow and plan for the future. And then, like we touched on this one a little bit earlier, but DR as a service, like expanding not only on-prem, but also expanding out into the public cloud. I got an interesting story with this one. So, Nutanix has a public cloud solution with Xi and Xi Leap. So that means that you're able to essentially just replicate to, Nutanix clusters that they'll host for you, and then you can fail over to that. Well, I moved out west recently, about 8-9 months ago, and learned all about forest fires that go on out here. And a couple of years ago, and the forest fires have been getting a little bit worse in recent years. A couple of years ago, Nutanix was able to reach out to all those customers that had Nutanix clusters out west that were in line of some of the forest fires going on in California. And with the whole essential one click, you just start replicating into Xi, and then in the event that a forest fire hit their main data center, they were able to just fail over to it. I mean, it was a similar operating system. It was running the Acropolis hypervisor. If you were running VMware on-prem, you could still convert over and use Acropolis hypervisor and Xi Leap. So that was really, really interesting and really compelling. And it brought over all the networks, all the VMs, applications, and it really made that DR as a service experience quite seamless and helped a lot of customers in that scenario.
No, that's awesome, and I think that's where that's where this modern infrastructure conversation kind of comes from. Is now that I'm on these platforms, all of the interesting and in this case even business saving, if you will, type of functions that I can bring to my on-prem infrastructure and still have a pathway to cloud. Again, use cloud and use on-prem for the right reasons. But being able to fail over between the two and make it seamless to the end user is really beneficial there. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you said pathway to cloud. So Nutanix has clusters. And so that's going to be, just like we're able to seamlessly fail over for DR as a service with Xi Leap, we can seamlessly fail over up into AWS or Azure using clusters. So that's essentially taking all the Nutanix software that you're running on-prem and then just placing it and consuming the resources to be able to host all that software up in the public cloud. So you get that very easy failover and similar management stacks, similar security. Certainly still some differences that you need to be cognizant of, but it certainly helps.
Well, I think I know we've covered a lot today. We've gone on kind of our own modern app journey, but again, thank you for everyone for joining today. If there's ways where Insight can help on your modern app journey, feel free to visit us at solutions.insight.com. And again, we appreciate the conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.